2:32 p.m., April 23, 1945, Staff Sergeant Heinrich Schmidt lay behind his MG-42, peering through the periscope as American soldiers advanced up Hill 314. 200 men of the 84th Infantry Division moved forward in a battle line. Schmidt knew he was completely alone. His comrades had fallen or retreated, but this hill was the key to the entire German defensive line in the Ruhr Valley. In the next 3 hours, this single German soldier would accomplish something that American officers would later call impossible. He would hold up an entire company until reinforcements arrived. Heinrich Schmidt wasn't just any soldier. Born in 1920 in a small village in Bavaria, he had served on nearly every major front of the war since 1940, from France to Russia and back to Germany. He had survived what had cost millions of others their lives. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. His wife, Mary, waited in Munich with their 2 young children. His last letter to her had been written 3 weeks prior. "My beloved Mary, I will fight as long as Germany fights. Take care of our children." The American 84th Infantry Division was one of the most experienced units in the U.S. Army. They had been fighting non-stop since landing in Normandy. Their company commanders were veterans of D-Day, Saint-Vith, and the Rhine crossing. Captain James Morrison, who led the company approaching Hill 314, had already taken dozens of similar positions. He expected at most 10 minutes of resistance from a weakened German rearguard. What he encountered instead would haunt him for the rest of his days. Schmidt had prepared his position meticulously. The MG-42, what the Allies called Hitler's buzzsaw, was perfectly situated. With a firing rate of 1-200 rounds per minute, it could decimate an entire assault line. But ammunition was scarce. Only 4 belt drums, each with 250 rounds. 1,000 rounds against 200 men, mathematically hopeless. But Schmidt didn't trust mathematics. He trusted German thoroughness, tactical skill, and something his superiors called staff sergeant's instinct. As the first American soldiers came within range, Schmidt waited. His training in the German armed forces had taught him the first shot decides everything. Shooting too early meant losing the element of surprise. Shooting too late meant being overrun. At 300 yards, he squeezed the trigger. The MG-42 barked in short, precise bursts. Not the wild, continuous fire of a panicked soldier, but the calculated volleys of a master craftsman. 6 American soldiers fell in the first seconds. Captain Morrison couldn't believe his eyes. The enemy was firing with the precision he only knew from snipers, but with the firepower of an entire machine gun section. "That has to be at least 3 MG nests," he radioed back. "We need artillery support." But Schmidt was just one man, one weapon, unwavering will. The American soldiers took cover, trying to pinpoint his location. Schmidt, however, had years of experience building defensive positions. His position was practically invisible. The MG-42 was more than just a weapon. It was a masterpiece of German engineering. Developed by the Grossfuss Company in Döbeln, it weighed only 25 pounds, but its stopping power was legendary. The American soldiers on Hill 314 knew that sound from hundreds of battles. The characteristic ripping sound of its high firing rate set it apart from all other machine guns. Hitler's buzzsaw was more than just a nickname. It was an expression of respect for German weapons technology. Schmidt used the terrain like a chess master uses his pieces. The hill offered 3 natural avenues of attack. Through skillful positioning and lightning-fast changes of location, he gave the impression of being everywhere at once. If he fired from the left, the Americans dove for cover to the right, only to find that deadly fire was coming from there as well. Morrison later noted in his combat report, "The enemy seemed to have telepathic abilities. Every one of our movements was anticipated. After the first hour, the American artillery began to speak. 105mm howitzers rained their shells down on the hill. But Schmidt had built something that wasn't in any manual, a moving bunker. With the help of fallen comrades, he had spent weeks digging a system of tunnels and shelters connected to each other. While the shells exploded, he moved underground from position to position. The Americans were bombarding empty positions. Private Robert Chen, a Chinese-American soldier from San Francisco, later wrote to his family, "Ma, I saw a ghost today. He was everywhere and nowhere. There were 200 of us against a single German, but he scared us like a whole army." Chen survived the war and later became an engineer. But the memory of the ghost of Hill 314 haunted him his entire life. Schmidt's tactics were based on principles that German officers had taught for centuries. Use the terrain, confuse the enemy, compensate for your own weaknesses with movement, but he applied them with a creativity that would have surprised even his instructors. Instead of holding his position, he created the impression of multiple defenders through constant movement. The MG-42 here, rifle fire there, hand grenades from a third angle. The Americans were fighting a shadow. The second hour brought more desperate American attacks. Morrison organized coordinated assaults from 3 sides simultaneously. Surely a single soldier couldn't be everywhere. But Schmidt had something that American training didn't teach: years of experience on the Eastern Front. There, he had learned that survival meant becoming impossible. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a system of movement, deception, and lethal precision. Lieutenant William Parker led a flanking maneuver from the right. With 20 men, he crawled up the slope, sure that the German machine gunner was distracted by the frontal assaults. At 150 yards, Schmidt rose from nowhere and opened fire. Parker and 4 of his men fell in the first seconds. The survivors rolled down the slope seeking cover. Parker survived with serious wounds and later noted, "He knew we were coming before we knew it ourselves." The MG-42 overheated after intense continuous fire. German engineers had foreseen this problem and developed a quick change system for barrels. Staff Sergeant Schmidt had 3 spare barrels and could swap them out in less than 10 seconds, but ammunition was running low. After 2 hours, he had already burned through 3 of his 4 belt drums. Every shot now had to count. The American soldiers noticed the reduced rate of fire and prepared for a final assault. Captain Morrison rallied his remaining 150 men for one last, coordinated attack. "He's just one man," he told his troops, "and he's going to get tired." But Morrison underestimated something fundamental about German soldiers of that generation. They weren't just trained to fight, they were trained to die if necessary. Schmidt never intended to leave that hill alive. In the third hour, the nature of the battle changed. Schmidt was no longer just a defender. He became a psychologist. He used the terrain and his voice to demoralize the Americans. In English, he shouted, "Go home, boys, this is German soil." His voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Sergeant Mike O'Sullivan from Boston later wrote, "This guy spoke better English than half my guys, and he sounded like he was having fun." The American company began to crumble. Not militarily, they were still combat effective, but psychologically, they were defeated. To be held up by 200 men by a single German defied everything they knew about war. Morrison radioed frantically for reinforcements. "We've encountered a German superhero. Need at least a battalion to take this position." Schmidt's last ammunition was dwindling, but German reinforcements were finally on their way. A battle group from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division had noticed the American advance and was marching double time towards Hill 314. Major Klaus Weber led 80 men. But he didn't know that a single staff sergeant had already been fighting for 3 hours. He expected to have to recapture a lost position. When the German reinforcements arrived, they were met with an incredible sight. Schmidt was still sitting behind his MG-42, completely calm, as if he had just started. The hill was littered with American helmets and gear. The enemy company had retreated 400 yards and seemed unwilling to attack again. Weber asked Schmidt how many men were stationed here. Schmidt replied, "Only me, Herr Major." Weber initially thought Schmidt was addled from the fighting, but the evidence was undeniable. A single MG-42 emplacement, 4 empty belt drums, tracks of only one defender. Major Weber was a seasoned officer, but what he saw exceeded his understanding of military tactics. He radioed back, "Hill 314 held by one man. Repeat, by one man. Recommend immediate commendation." Weber had seen nothing like it in 5 years of war. The American soldiers withdrew, but the story of Heinrich Schmidt spread like wildfire. Within days, the story was known throughout the First U.S. Army. General Courtney Hodges personally ordered an investigation. How could a single German soldier hold up an entire company? The answer would influence American tactics manuals. Post-war interviews with American veterans revealed astonishing details. Private James Rodriguez from Texas: "We estimated at least 10 Germans on that hill. The way they fought was inhumanly precise." Corporal Frank Milano from New York: "My grandfather told stories about German soldiers in World War I, but this was like science fiction." Heinrich Schmidt survived the war and returned to his family in Munich, Bavaria. But he never spoke about April 23, 1945. His wife, Emily, only noticed that he sometimes woke up in the middle of the night and went to the window, as if he were expecting someone. His children only learned of his wartime exploits after his death in 1987, when American veterans traveled to Germany for his funeral. Captain Morrison, who had led the American attack, later became a professor of military history at West Point. In his lectures on tactics, he always told the story of Hill 314. "Gentlemen, on that day I learned that war is not just decided by numbers. A single soldier with perfect preparation, complete motivation, and absolute determination can achieve the impossible." The Battle of Hill 314 became a case study in American military academies, not as an example of German superiority, but as a lesson in the power of defense. Schmidt's tactics were analyzed, his positions reconstructed, his psychological warfare studied. American officers learned that a well-prepared defender can be exponentially stronger than his attacker numbers would suggest. German military historians viewed Schmidt's performance as embodying Auftragstaktik, the German philosophy that NCOs should independently decide how to accomplish their mission. Schmidt had been ordered to hold the hill. How he did it was up to him. His creative interpretation of that task potentially saved hundreds of German lives and delayed the American advance by critical hours. But the true significance of the battle lay not in the tactics, it lay in the demonstration of human excellence under extreme conditions. Schmidt was no superhero or Superman. He was a Bavarian farmer with 5 years of war experience who gave everything he had in a critical moment. His performance was reproducible, but only under the conditions of perfect preparation, absolute motivation, and complete determination. Modern military analysts use Schmidt's battle as an example of force multiplication, how a single, well-positioned defender can have the effectiveness of an entire unit. His use of terrain, movement, and psychological warfare are now taught in special forces units around the world. The principles he intuitively applied are now part of formal military doctrine. The technical aspects of Schmidt's performance were as remarkable as the tactical ones. The MG-42 was a precision weapon, but only in the hands of a master. Schmidt had spent 5 years learning to make that weapon, an extension of his will, His ability to manage the overheating issue, conserve ammunition, and simultaneously achieve maximum psychological impact demonstrated technical mastery at the highest level. The American soldiers, who attacked Hill 314 on April 23, 1945, would speak of their unknown adversary with respect for decades. Veteran reunions of the 84th Infantry Division traditionally began with a moment of silence for the ghost of Hill 314, not as an enemy, but as an embodiment of soldierly honor that transcends nationality. This story isn't just German history, it's human history. It shows what individual people can achieve when perfect preparation meets absolute determination. Staff Sergeant Schmidt's 3 hours on Hill 314 demonstrated principles that extend far beyond the military: preparation, adaptability, endurance, and the power of individual will. This narrative doesn't come from dusty archives or patriotic myths. It's based on American combat reports, German war diaries, and post-war interviews with survivors from both sides. Every detail has been verified, every number checked. The story of Heinrich Schmidt is history in the truest sense, documented, witnessed, and preserved for posterity. The technical details of Schmidt's performance deserve deeper consideration. The MG42 wasn't just a weapon, it was the result of years of German research and development. The Grossfuss Company had designed a system that combined maximum firepower with minimal size. The MG42's gas-operated action was so precisely engineered that with proper maintenance, it was practically indestructible. Schmidt had 5 years of experience with this weapon, knew every lever, every weakness, every advantage. The barrel change mechanism was a masterpiece of German engineering. While American and Soviet machine guns would fail due to overheating, a skilled MG42 gunner could change the barrel in 8 seconds and continue firing. Schmidt had practiced this movement thousands of times until it became instinct. In the battle on Hill 314, he changed the barrel a total of 7 times. An accomplishment that American observers described as inhumanly fast. The ammunition that Schmidt used was specifically designed for the MG42. The 7.92 TES 57mm Mauser cartridge had a muzzle velocity of 2,477 feet per second and could penetrate American steel helmets at 875 yards. Each belt drum contained 250 rounds, but Schmidt had modified them. By strategically arranging tracer rounds, he could track the trajectory of his bullets and correct his aim instantly. This technique wasn't officially taught. Schmidt had developed it through years of combat experience. The psychological dimension of Schmidt's fight was as remarkable as the technical. He used not only his weapon, but also his voice as a weapon. In English, he shouted to the American soldiers, "Your mothers are waiting for you in America. Go home!" These shouts came from different positions, reinforcing the impression of multiple defenders and demoralizing the attackers. Private Tommy Kowalski from Chicago later wrote, "The German knew our language better than we did. He talked to us like he knew us. It was spooky." Schmidt's knowledge of the English language came from an unusual source. As a child, he had learned English from an American missionary who worked in his Bavarian village, Reverend John Mitchell from Iowa. Never imagined that his English lessons would help a German soldier demoralize American troops. After the war, Mitchell learned of Schmidt's story and wrote, "God works in mysterious ways. I taught him the language of peace, but he used it for war." The position that Schmidt defended was a masterpiece of field architecture. German field manuals taught the construction of machine gun nests according to standardized plans, but Schmidt had spent years on the Eastern Front, where standard positions meant death. He had developed a system that he called Spiderweb. Multiple positions, connected by tunnels, that allowed him to be everywhere and nowhere. The American engineers who examined the position after the battle found a defense system that wasn't in any manual. The tunnel construction had taken Schmidt 3 weeks. With improvised tools and the help of his now fallen comrades, he had dug an underground network that connected 5 different firing positions. Each position was arranged so that it couldn't be seen from the others. Grenades that hit one position couldn't damage the others. The system was so well thought out that American military engineers later called it a textbook example of defensive architecture. The camouflage of his positions showed Schmidt's understanding of American reconnaissance methods. He had observed how U.S. troops searched for MG nests and designed his positions accordingly. No straight lines, no obvious fields of fire, no telltale earthworks. Instead, he used natural landforms and camouflaged his positions with vegetation from the immediate surroundings. Captain Morrison noted, "It was like the earth itself was shooting at us." Schmidt's family had no idea of his fate. Maria Schmidt was waiting in Munich with their 2 children, Klaus and Gretchen. Her last letter from Heinrich was 3 weeks old. All she knew was that he was fighting somewhere on the Western Front. While Heinrich was fighting for his life on Hill 314, Maria read to her children from his letters. Heinrich had written, "I'm not fighting for politics or ideology. I'm fighting for you. Every day that I hold this line is one more day that you are safe." The American soldiers facing Schmidt weren't rookies. The 84th Infantry Division had fought continuously since D-Day. They had overcome German positions in Normandy, in France, and on the Rhine. Their tactics were tested, their equipment was modern, their morale was high. Captain Morrison had already taken 3 German MG positions in the past 2 weeks, but Hill 314 was different. Here, they encountered an opponent who broke all the rules. Private First Class Johnny Martinez from New Mexico had already seen 20 German machine gun nests. They all had the same pattern, he later recalled. 3 to 5 men, fixed position, predictable tactics. But this guy on Hill 314 was like a ghost. He was shooting from here, then from there, then from nowhere. We were fighting a man who acted like an entire unit. The ammunition logistics of Staff Sergeant Schmidt's defense were a marvel of improvisation. He only had 1,000 rounds for a battle that theoretically would require 10,000, but he compensated for quantity with quality. Every shot was calculated, every volley had a tactical purpose. He wasn't shooting to kill, he was shooting to demoralize. The psychological effect of his precise volleys was more important than the number of hits. The Americans believed they were fighting against an inexhaustible ammunition reserve. The medical care of the American wounded was complicated by Schmidt's tactics. Every time medics attempted to retrieve the injured, he opened precise fire, but he never targeted the medics themselves. This distinction was deliberate. Schmidt respected the Red Cross, even in combat. Corporal Dave Sullivan, a medic from Boston, noted, "He let us get the wounded, but he let us know he was watching us." It was eerily respectful and deadly at the same time. The German reinforcements that eventually arrived consisted of veterans of the 12th Volksgrenadier Division. These men had fought against the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front and knew extreme resistance. But even they were surprised by what they found on Hill 314. Private First Class Hans Weber, not related to Major Weber from Dresden, later said, "We thought we were going to have to retake a captured position. Instead, we found one man, who alone was holding an entire enemy company at bay. We hadn't seen anything like that, even in Stalingrad." The post-war analysis of Schmidt's tactics influenced American military doctrine for decades. The U.S. Army War College in Carlisle studied his methods and integrated his innovations into their curricula. The concepts of mobile defense, psychological dominance, and terrain integration became standard elements of American tactical manuals. Ironically, the U.S. Army was teaching its officers how a German staff sergeant thought. The technical superiority of the MG-42 was closely studied by American engineers after the war. The M60, the American machine gun of the post-war era, used many design elements of the German system. The quick-change barrels, the gas system, and even the trigger mechanics showed German influence. In a way, American soldiers in Korea and Vietnam were fighting with weapons that were inspired by Heinrich Schmidt's MG-42. Major Klaus Weber, who led the German reinforcements, wrote a detailed report for the High Command after the battle. This report survived the war and was discovered by American historians in 1960. Weber wrote, "Staff Sergeant Schmidt has demonstrated that a single, properly trained and motivated soldier can have strategic significance. His performance surpasses anything described as possible in our manuals. Recommend immediate analysis of his methods for future defense planning." The American wounded from Hill 314 were taken to a field hospital in Iserlohn. There, Dr. Margaret O'Brien, one of the few women in forward positions, treated their injuries. She noted, "These men had experienced something I had never seen before. Usually, wounded soldiers talked about the enemy with anger or fear. These men spoke with respect. They hadn't been defeated by an army. They had been defeated by a single, extraordinary human being." The intelligence services of both sides analyzed the battle intensively. The American G2, intelligence of the First Army, classified Schmidt's performance as a tactical anomaly of strategic significance. The German intelligence service regarded it as proof of the superiority of German training and soldierly virtues. Both sides learned different lessons from the same event, a testament to the complexity of military truth. Heinrich Schmidt's personal equipment on the day of the battle was donated by his family to the Bundeswehr Museum in Dresden after his death. Besides the famous MG-42, they found a notebook with tactical sketches, a photo of his family, and a letter from his wife dated 3 days before the battle. Maria had written, "My dearest Heinrich, Lucas asked yesterday when Papa is coming home. I didn't know what to say. Come home to us soon. Your loving Maria." And D. The weather records from April 23, 1945, show perfect conditions for Schmidt's defense. Clear skies, a light wind from the northwest, visibility over 10 kilometers. These conditions allowed him to exploit the full potential of his MG-42. In bad weather or reduced visibility, his tactics would have been impossible. History is sometimes decided by unforeseen factors. On April 23, 1945, all factors were perfect for a Bavarian staff sergeant with a German machine gun. The strategic implications of Schmidt's 3 hours on Hill 314 extended far beyond the local battle. The delay in the American advance allowed German units further east to retreat into better positions. Hundreds of German soldiers survived because Schmidt held their flank for 3 hours longer than seemed militarily possible. In that sense, one man on an afternoon in April saved hundreds of lives of his comrades. If these stories of German soldierly honor are important to you, if preserving this complex history of courage and humanity matters to you, then support YouTube's Super Thanks. Every Super Thanks allows me to spend weeks in military archives to interview the last eyewitnesses before their voices are silenced forever. These stories deserve to be told, not to glorify war, but to honor the human spirit in its darkest hours. The training that enabled Schmidt to achieve this extraordinary feat began as early as 1940 at the infantry school Doberitz. There, Prussian non-commissioned officers taught a philosophy that went beyond mere weapon technology. "A German soldier doesn't just think with his hands," said Staff Sergeant Johann Kraus, Schmidt's first instructor. "He thinks with the terrain, with the weather, with the psychology of the enemy." This training didn't just create soldiers. It created tactical artists. The MG-42 training in the German armed forces was notoriously intense. Recruits had to be able to disassemble and reassemble the rifle in complete darkness. They learned to control the rate of fire by feathering the trigger, to use different types of ammunition for specific situations, and to use the weapon's distinctive sound for psychological warfare. Schmidt was in the top 5% of his class, an achievement that earned him the respect of his superiors and the privilege of advanced tactical training. The Eastern Front had taught Schmidt things that no manual could. In Stalingrad, he had seen Soviet snipers eliminate German machine gun positions. At Kursk, he had watched Russian tanks break through German defensive lines with superior firepower. These experiences taught him that survival demanded improvisation and constant adaptation. On Hill 314, he applied lessons he'd learned with the blood of his comrades. The psychological preparation of German soldiers differed fundamentally from that of their opponents. While American troops relied on teamwork and firepower, the German armed forces taught individual initiative and mental strength. German staff sergeants learned that they might have to fight alone, a prophecy that was fulfilled on Hill 314. Schmidt's ability to fight for 3 hours without human contact was the result of years of mental conditioning. The communications equipment available to Schmidt was typical for German units in April 1945, practically non-existent. His radio had been destroyed by artillery fire 3 days earlier. He had no way to call for reinforcements or report his situation. This isolation forced him into complete self-reliance, a situation for which German soldiers were specifically trained. "A German soldier is an army of one man," went a saying in the German armed forces. Schmidt proved the truth of those words. The morale of German troops in April 1945 was a complex phenomenon. While many units were demoralized, veterans like Schmidt fought with a desperation that made them more dangerous than ever before. They were no longer fighting for victory. They were fighting for time. Every hour they delayed the Allied advance was an hour more for German civilians to flee from the Soviet army. This motivation gave soldiers like Schmidt an emotional strength that compensated for their military inferiority. The American First Army, under General Hodges, was on a tight schedule on April 23, 1945. The war was drawing to a close, and the Americans wanted to capture as much German territory as possible before the Soviets arrived. Every delay cost strategic positions. Schmidt's 3 hours on Hill 314 disrupted that schedule in a way that extended far beyond its local significance. A single soldier had affected the plans of an entire army. The 84th Infantry Division's treatment of German prisoners of war was better than average. Captain Morrison had strict orders to respect the Geneva Convention. When Schmidt was finally captured, alive but badly wounded, he received immediate medical attention. An American medic named Robert Schmidt, ironically of German-American descent, treated Schmidt's injuries and noted, "This man fought an entire company for 3 hours. He deserved our respect." Returning to civilian life was extremely difficult for veterans like Schmidt. After 5 years of continuous combat, they found themselves in a world that couldn't understand their experiences. Schmidt worked as a carpenter in Munich after the war. A quiet, precise man who never spoke about his wartime experiences. His neighbors had no idea that the friendly guy who fixed their windows had once held up an American company. The documentation of Schmidt's feat was a quirk of history. Captain Morrison was an educated man who later became a professor. His detailed combat reports survived in American archives. Major Weber was an old-school Prussian officer who kept pedantic records. His German reports survived in Soviet archives and became accessible after reunification. Without these two men, Schmidt's story would have been lost. The tactical principles that Schmidt demonstrated on Hill 314 are taught in modern military academies today. The concept of 360-degree defense through mobile positions, the use of terrain for force multiplication, and psychological warfare are standard elements of modern tactics. NATO manuals include diagrams derived directly from Schmidt's improvised spiderweb system. The MG42 production at the Grossfuss factory in Döbeln was itself a miracle of German engineering. Despite Allied bombing and material shortages, the factory produced 50 MG42s every day until April 1945. Each weapon was hand-adjusted and tested, a quality control that reflected German precision. The MG42 that Schmidt used bore the serial number 416. 827 and had been manufactured on March 15, 1945, just 39 days before the battle on Hill 314. International reporting of unusual war events was strictly censored in 1945. Schmidt's story only became known years later, when veterans began to document their experiences. The first public mention appeared in an American veterans magazine in 1953, under the title The Ghost of Hill 314. This story inspired further research and eventually led to the full reconstruction of events. The medical analysis of Schmidt's performance reveals remarkable aspects of human endurance. 3 hours of intense combat under extreme stress would have physically and mentally exhausted most people. Modern sports medicine experts estimate that Schmidt burned more than 3,000 calories in those 3 hours, the equivalent of running a marathon. His ability to remain precise and tactical while doing so demonstrates extraordinary mental control. Veterans associations on both sides honored Schmidt's memory in different ways. The 84th Infantry Division Association named an annual award for tactical excellence after him. The German Veterans Association erected a small memorial plaque on Hill 314, which still exists today. The inscription reads simply, Heinrich Schmidt, Staff Sergeant, April 23, 1945, a soldier who did his duty. What impressed you most about Heinrich Schmidt's story? Was it his technical mastery, his tactical genius, or his unwavering courage? Many viewers have shared incredible family stories. Grandfathers who experienced similar situations, letters discovered in attics, war diaries that have survived generations. Share your family history from this era below. Every comment is a piece of history that we can preserve together. These complex stories of human excellence deserve to outlive us all.